Next, let's talk about transactional replication. Now, with transactional replication, it uses a snapshot in order to be able to establish that database, establish that initial copy of the data, and then it catches changes by reading the transaction log. It catches changes that happen to all the data that's being synchronized over time. So let's say you have 5 tables that you've set up with transactional replication. What it's going to do when it gets first initialized is it's going to make a snapshot to move all the data over for the first time. And then once that snapshot has been delivered, it's going to keep track of all of the changes that are happening on the publisher and send all of those changes out to each of the subscribers by catching that through the transaction log. So, and that can be set up on different intervals where it could sync almost continuously, or you could have it sync less often. But it really just keeps track of those changes and moves them in one direction from the publisher out to the subscriber. Now, well, the problem you run into that is that you can't really go making changes to that data on the subscriber because anything you change may get overwritten from the publisher again. Not really a safe thing to do to go making those changes. But it's great if you're in a situation where you need to do some kind of a reporting and you don't want to put some type of reporting. You don't want to put the load on the primary database. Worked in an environment where the client had a lot of load on their OLTP databases, and they weren't able to run the reports that they wanted to run against those OLTP databases because they were just too heavy of a load on the database. So what they had set up was they'd set up transactional replication to synchronize all the data from one server off to the other server, from one database off to the other database on a different server, in order to make it so you could run those heavy reporting queries against that replicated database that was fairly up to date, instead of having to run it against the live production database. And I've worked, since seeing that environment probably 10 years ago, I've worked with other clients probably 15 times where we've set up something similar to that, where they're in a situation where they're some type of reporting is putting too much load on that primary database that we need to offload it. So we offload it off to another database using transactional replication. Now, transactional replication doesn't require a lot of changes to the database. I think all it requires is that you have a unique primary key on your tables so that you can use that to identify what's being updated or what's being moved off to the replicated side, where merge replication takes a little bit more to get it configured and set up. Transactional replication, it's pretty quick and easy to get set up when you're first using SQL Server replication. And when you're setting it up, you just want to make sure you understand how much data is being transferred. And I guess this would apply to all types of replication, but how much data is being transferred, how often it's being transferred, and how big that connection is between the two servers. Now, if you're in the same data center or the same office and you've just got those configured side by side on a 10 gigabit network or whatever high-speed network you've got, yeah, it might not be that big of a deal. But if you're having to take like 75 gigs of data, and every time it reinitializes, it has to copy that 75 gigs from the primary server out to or from the publisher out to the subscribers, that's a big chunk of data that you have to move across the network. And if that network connection is going through a VPN across the internet, maybe somewhere on the other side of the planet where they've got a slower internet connection, well, that might take a little bit longer than if it's initializing side by side. We've seen some scenarios where you test it locally and it works great. We can reinitialize replication in like 10 minutes. And then you try and synchronize to a client site that's out at some distant location on a slow network connection, and it takes more than 24 hours. So you want to make sure that wherever you're trying to synchronize the data to, that they at least have a fast enough internet connection that you're able to get that done without waiting too long. And usually what happens when that's being reinitialized, and it might take that 24 hours to copy, that database at that client site isn't really usable because the data is only partway there while it's being reinitialized. So anyway, transactional replication, it's great for situations where you have central data that you need to push out close to real time to multiple subscribers. And I've seen it work really well in a lot of environments. And as far as kind of taking care of it over time, transactional replication is pretty straightforward.